So, what happens when you take a text that's 2,000 years old and use it to analyze modern political language? Well, today we're going to break down a really fascinating source that does exactly that, creating a kind of ethical case study of our current political world. Okay, let's just dive right into this, because this is the big, provocative question at the very heart of the text we're looking at. And the source itself knows this is an unusual way to go about it, but it argues the point isn't about playing historian. It's about finding a consistent ethical yardstick. And this is a super important point the author makes right from the start. The text is not, I repeat, not claiming that Jesus was literally talking about modern political figures. No. Instead, it's using his recorded words as a kind of fixed ethical framework, a steady baseline to measure the function and the real-world impact of today's political rhetoric. So, what is this ethical standard we're talking about? Well, it's built on a few core principles from the Gospels that the author says are foundational to an ethic of human dignity, no matter who you are or where you come from. First up, we've got what's often called the Golden Rule. The author argues this isn't just some quaint suggestion to be nice. It's actually a radical challenge to any kind of rhetoric that devalues or makes sweeping generalizations about whole groups of people. It demands that we see our own humanity in the other. Then the text zooms in on this idea of the neighbor. Now, according to the source's analysis, the real power here is that a neighbor isn't just the person who lives next door. It explicitly includes the outsider, the stranger, the marginalized, the very people who are often easiest to ignore or push away. And that makes it a powerful counter to dehumanization. And this is really where it all comes together. According to the source, this framework says a person's value isn't tied to their status or their nationality or what their passport looks like. It's tied to their inherent human dignity. The focus is always on the most vulnerable among us. Okay, so now let's see how the source actually applies this ethical framework. It takes a look at documented statements from Donald Trump, and it treats them as case studies for how language can be used as a tool to discriminate and dehumanize. So the source brings up this first example from 2015, and the author points out that this rhetoric isn't just critiquing a policy, it's painting an entire nationality, millions and millions of individuals, with a single criminal brush. It's designed to create a climate of fear and suspicion. This slide really breaks down the source's argument perfectly. This is a classic tactic of racist rhetoric. You create this blanket suspicion that directly violates that core principle of reciprocal dignity, because it completely refuses to see people as individuals. Now, the source's analysis of this 2018 statement is pretty insightful. It argues this isn't just about a preference for certain immigrants. It's an act of marking, of branding certain people and the places they come from as inherently less valuable, as disposable, as dirt. The text argues that this is how this language functions. It creates cultural categories of who's clean and who's unwanted, and that's a direct collision with the ethical standard that says a person's value is based on their shared humanity, not the country on their passport. So, building on that, the source continues this direct side-by-side comparison to explore how language can end up normalizing extremist viewpoints and promoting a kind of exclusionary nationalism. After the events in Charlottesville in 2017, the source really hones in on the framing of this statement. The author argues that the act of equating white nationalists with counter-protesters isn't a neutral statement. It's an act that gives legitimacy to hate. According to the author, creating this false equivalence, this both sides argument, is an incredibly powerful political tool. It intentionally blurs the moral line between hate speech and legitimate protest, and in doing so, it gives cover to the former and actually shifts what the public considers acceptable to say. In this example from 2019, the source points to what it calls a classic tool of racist exclusion. The statement questions the very belonging of American citizens based on their ethnicity, implying that they aren't really from here. So, for the author, the crucial point here is that telling a fellow citizen to go back isn't just an insult. It's a direct attack on the very foundations of a pluralistic, democratic society, which absolutely depends on the idea of equal rights for all citizens, regardless of their heritage. So, what are the bigger implications of all this? This final section zooms out to present the source's overall conclusion about what this kind of rhetoric really means for the health of a democracy. The text argues that these examples aren't just random, unconnected insults. They're all pieces of a coherent political strategy. It identifies them as part of a pattern, a toolkit designed to divide the public, scapegoat minorities, and ultimately to redefine who really belongs in the nation. And the source is really adamant on this point. This is not about style or political correctness. The argument is that language creates reality, and a specific kind of language actively builds a reality of fear, of division, and of real-world harm for the people it targets. In other words, words have consequences. The text concludes by arguing that defending democratic values isn't a passive activity. It requires an active, three-part response. First, you have to clearly name discriminatory language for what it is. Second, you have to refute it with facts and ethics. And third, you have to show solidarity with the people being targeted. Ultimately, the source leaves us with this really powerful question to chew on. It suggests that while free speech is essential, it forces us to ask, at what point does rhetoric stop being an idea and start becoming an act of harm? And how should a healthy democracy respond to that?